It's crazy that an interview between a historian and Tucker Carlson could set off a ripple effect that would echo across the internet.
Tucker Carlson, who, by the way, spoke at the RNC, he platformed a guest who said that Winston Churchill, not Hitler, was the chief villain of World War II.
All the way to CNN connected to politics.
Tucker's doing all this stuff, and yet J.D. Vance, the guy who's on the Republican ticket, he is at an event with him September 21st. They're charging people $200 a ticket.
That Elon Musk comments on the podcast and then receives backlash and then deletes the comment. And then there's news stories about him deleting the comment, and it...
Initially, he called the conversation, quote, very interesting, worth watching. That tweet has now been deleted.
So it is worth applying critical thinking to, and I would just encourage everyone to think for oneself, follow facts. It's okay to disagree. It's okay for them to have this conversation. Daryl Cooper can have his perspective on this, and these are just my thoughts.
I thought Churchill was the chief villain of the Second World War. Now, he didn't kill the most people. He didn't commit the most atrocities.
So Daryl Cooper's making the case that he prolonged a war that could have been ended peaceably.
You see that he was primarily responsible for that war becoming what it did.
And I have dug into this pretty extensively because, I mean, my master's thesis was on Churchill's cooperation with the president of Harvard before even America got involved, what people were thinking. And I got access to the Harvard archive and was able to go through, and I learned a lot. So I would issue a debate challenge to Daryl Cooper, to Tucker Carlson.
I read about Churchill, and he strikes me as a psychopath. As an adult, as prime minister, they'd find him in his room, and he's like playing with action figures like war toys and army men and stuff. Strange fellow, you know?
We saw with Neville Chamberlain, he did try and negotiate this route of appeasement. He flew to Germany, met with Hitler, got a little piece of paper signed, flew back and victoriously waved this little piece of paper as though it was the solution.
But what if he breaks his word? Then you're going to be made to look like a fool.
What did Hitler do? He just said it's a piece of paper, whatever, and just bulldozed everything anyways. So he recognized, okay, there's no other route here but to fight to the end, even when everyone around him was telling him this is insane, we will all die. And he said,
then let it end only when each one of us lies choking in his own blood upon the ground.
Which sounds extreme. Is it barbaric to ask your populace to fight on to death?
Absolutely.
But what if that is the very thing that saved them in the end?
It's a barbaric thing to say. We're going to fight until the end. We're going to continue to attack these people over and over again, even though we have no hope of winning by ourselves.
The reason I resent Churchill so much for it is that he kept this war going when he had no way to go back and fight this war.
You're outnumbered. All of England has fallen. It's the darkest hour. Is it unethical to not surrender and to fight on, even if it means the death or the fall of your own country and the defeat of your entire army?
Why would he do that?
Sometimes you have to fight even to defeat, because with the idea that nations that go down fighting stand a chance of rising again one day.
Whoa.
So is it immoral?
Where's the evidence for that?
Believing that to be true I would say, saved them. Had Churchill listened to everyone else, had you removed Churchill from the mix, the world would look very different today. He believed he was fighting a losing war, and yet he continued on. And he was very open about this.
We will fight in the field and in the streets.
We will fight on the beaches. We'll fight in the air. We will never surrender. So yes, that's true, Daryl Cooper. But is that unethical? It worked, would be my counter. It worked. He lived as though God existed. Some might say it was a miracle. Daryl Cooper would probably attribute it to more of a conspiracy, and he also believes Churchill was like in the pockets of Zionists and all of this stuff.
But then you get into, why was Winston Churchill such a dedicated booster of Zionism from early on in his life?
The phrase about Zionist financiers is a dog whistle, frankly. It's also completely untrue, not least because the financiers who did support him, people like Bernie Baruch and Sir Henry Strakosch, were not Zionists.
Daryl Cooper's making the case like Churchill wanted war.
Churchill wanted a war. He wanted to fight Germany.
It doesn't make sense. He only became prime minister later on, after the invasion of these countries like Belgium and Luxembourg and Holland had taken place.
Was it a war crime for him to kill 180 tens of thousands of German civilians in Dresden by firebombing that city?
What else was in Dresden?
Nothing of such. There was the Krupp factory there. Was the Porsche factory there? Was the Mercedes-Benz factory there? No, that's in Stuttgart.
The target is Dresden. It was being used to pump German troops into counterattacks against the Russian army not many miles to the east. This strike put a stop to that.
Why would he do that?
Because it was the only means that they had to continue fighting at the time. All he had were bombers. He was literally, by 1940, sending bomber fleets to go firebomb the Black Forest, just to burn down sections of the Black Forest. Just rank terrorism.
And maybe it's because we no longer have people who remember the Second World War still alive today, who are able to say that nobody knew how that war was going to end, and that you had to fight it with every means you had.
Do you really believe that? You really believe that America never gets involved? England just needed to stay on their island and they never would have been invaded by the Germans?
Yes.
Interesting. Then let's debate this, because this is a very interesting debate. This is important.
They didn't have the ability to reinvade Europe. And so he needed to keep this war going until he accomplished what he hoped to accomplish. We know now the extent of media operations, propaganda operations, everything that they were running in the United States to eventually drag us into that war. And that was his whole plan.
That was the only strategic move, was to hold out in the hope that God would extend his hand.
Kept the war going long enough for that plan to come to fruition.
The logic of what you're saying there is that he should have surrendered. That's the only counter to he exacerbated the war, meaning he held out too long.
Kept the war going long enough for that plan to come to fruition. And to me, it's a craven, ugly way to fight a war. And
what was the motive?
It's remarkable, because if you take out one of these dominoes and say, well, okay, Churchill, he could have solved this sooner. How would he have solved it? The only logical counter to that you're proposing would be, okay, he negotiates. Negotiates what?
That Adolf Hitler was lying, essentially, when he said that he had no territorial ambitions in Europe beyond bringing the Germans back into Germany.
There was no logical option other than to stand one's ground. And eventually, everyone's realized that. Everyone that was advocating for appeasement, the entire cabinet, all his advisors that were Chamberlain, Halifax, that were trying to throw Churchill out of office, making the same argument. When you are exploring history, it does take time. And the nature of what I am doing with this, and just making quick points, there's no way for me to fully encapsulate his entire points or all the context that he's trying to provide. So by definition, everything that I can show on screen is going to be by definition out of context. So, but the ripple effect here was truly remarkable.